SAAFF recently hosted a transport forum event under the banner Reform or Retreat. Is South Africa strong enough at this inflection point to unlock growth and sustainability? And during this event, we had the privilege of hosting many esteemed speakers, none more so than political economist Claude Nabaisa, CEO of Unomics, who offered a candid assessment of the country's current economic and institutional position. From a logistics perspective, using empirical data, the numbers themselves tell an important story. Transnet, and by implication, South Africa's wider logistics network has arrested the decline. In the container environment, in particular, throughput is up nearly 8% year to date, signaling early but meaningful momentum. Indeed, the improvement aligns with the empirical findings we presented at the event, where operational indicators across anchorage, turnaround times, crane utilization, and ship working hours all point to a system beginning to stabilize after several years of acute strain. But as Claude rightly challenged us, we are not yet out of the woods. Many perils and obstacles, a significant number of which are political, still stand in the way of fully unlocking South Africa's logistical and economic potential. Unpacking these issues further, we move beyond the metrics to examine how empirical decision-making, institutional reform, and greater stakeholder coordination can translate early operational recovery into sustained competitiveness. This conversation sits at the heart of today's episode. And for that, I hand over to Dr. Unita Maria, CEO of the Southern African Association of Freight Forwarders.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you to remind our audience how did we engage to make sure that we can have podcasts and we will keep them up to date in the progress. So, colleagues, we receive a couple of questions, and today I'm going to ask Claude to share his insights and maybe more important, his personal viewpoint, because he looks from the outside in, and I think it's important to always look from the outside in, because sometimes when we're so much in the logistics network, we can't step back and we can't look from the outside in. So, Claude, during our discussion, you raised a very important concept, and there was, I think, 5 questions around it. We came out of state capture, and we all understand the devastating effect it had on the equipment and the performance. But I want to focus today on what do you think we need to do to safeguard ourselves, that we don't enter into that space again. So can I hand over to you, share your thoughts, educate us, and see if you think what could be practically implemented by us as operators in the supply chain to make sure that we never get to the situation where we were in the last 10 years. Thank you.
Juanita, thank you. Jacob, thank you again for hosting me on this follow-on conversation to what was really an enlightening and humbling transport forum last week, and your speakers were phenomenal. Me notwithstanding, obviously, I just want to, perhaps the most poignant reply to your indirect reply to your very direct question is what the head of the public prosecution's office said to Parliament, Shamila Batouri, where she said we're losing the battle against organized crime. And I mean, that says something very profound to what is happening to state institutions in South Africa. And it's an alarm cry from someone who is supposed to be at the forefront, the tip of the sword of the struggle against crime. And you might say, well, crime isn't state capture, but yes, state capture was criminal. And when you have allegations that are being made at the Madlonga Commission that top cops and ministers of police would be in the hands of organized crime, and prima facie evidence goes into that way. After what we've gone through, the state capture inquiry and the collapse of Eskom and Transnet and the economy, a process of 10, 15 years, I think the first duty of every economic actor is to not be lulled into the comfort of the very true, very credible numbers you share with us every week, which are definitely good news and definitely something to rejoice. But that is just one fraction of the picture and the problem and the work that needs to be solved in South Africa. You don't. So, Transnet and Eskom were targets of state capture because they are parastatals that are fairly easy to take control of via appointment of new ministers, via appointment of new boards, and then via appointment of CEOs and executives. Something like that happened under everybody's nose, and there was a lot of discomfort about it when it was happening, but there was a lot of silence or acquiescence. Because people don't like to put their necks out. That's why we have whistleblowers, and whistleblowers tend to be isolated and punished by society. So we all played a role, one way or another, in allowing this to take place. Because in a democratic society like South Africa, where you have such a powerful constitution and such an incredible Bill of Rights, and where fundamental freedoms are protected, and they remain protected thanks to the press, thanks to civil society, civic society, and thanks to the judiciary. When you have those institutions, we have the means, and not just the means and the rights, but we have the citizens' obligation to act against this. But there is a deeper picture to the capture of those parastatals, right? Behind the capture of the parastatals was the capture of the government itself, and broadly, the ANC, which went from being a Mbeki ANC to a Zuma ANC. What's astounding is that SA at the time was the darling of the world. It was a rainbow nation. Whatever we think about it, it was growing at 4.5% per annum. It has a relatively functioning state. And at that peak performance, when unemployment was finally decreasing, inequality was finally decreasing, when there was FDI and debt was at 25% of GDP, for crying out loud. And social transfers were starting to increase, and educational outcomes were starting to improve. The ANC, in its immense unwisdom, with the tripartite alliance, in their immense unwisdom, took away those successes and turned them into catastrophic failure. That's a political project. So, and I said during the, last week during the forum, I said, at the end of the day, the citizens are responsible. We are responsible. Now, the most serious aspect of that, and that's my next step, is the prelude to the ANC change of policy and bringing in Zuma. This prelude was the battles around the armed deal and the intelligence services and the police and all of that. That battle, that essential battle that took place around 2003, 4, 5, 6, all those years, which in part coagulated around the arms deal saga. But the arms deal saga was really just kind of a theater for something much more fundamental, which was a battle for the control of the national intelligence and security cluster. And that battle was won by Zuma and his acolytes. And everything that's happened since then is largely enabled by or the product of that, including the structural criminalization of the police service, the intelligence service, the armed forces. And it is only now that this is really truly coming out, but it's been around. I mean, I did a lot of work back at the time in the mid 2000s till about 2009-10, where it simply became too dangerous. I was involved in a lot of projects, private sector and public projects, where I could see the direction of travel. And that is what led me to write about the state and, can South Africa be a developmental state? Are we going to become a failed state? I had seen 15 years, 20 years ago, the capture of the police service and the intelligence services by organized criminal banks, absolutely connected to the ANC. Absolutely. And that has become so profound, so institutionalized. I mean, when Shamila Batohi said, we are not allowed to investigate, we are being denied the means of conducting investigations, we are undercapacitated, underfunded. Who's we? Who's not giving those means? What are the vested interests? Who are the people who are behind that? And is the Madlanga Commission going to really truly raise that up? Or is it so profound? Now, that's a real existential threat to anything that's being done in South Africa, including the work being done in logistics and power and the economy. And it is a fundamental blockage by criminal vested interests that are married to business and to politics that are stopping, most of what needs to happen. I mean, corruption is continually happening. We see it in hospital, we see it in road accident funds. No one that I know of who has been named in the State Capture Commission has been charged and trialed. These are political decisions. So I can't help but think, Ranita, that there is somehow, somewhere between some people of influence, a sort of maybe unsaid pact that we will reform the most urgent and the most catastrophic areas of failure because there's public outrage and clamoring, and it threatens the vote of the ANC, as they lost, majority last year. So there's a political necessity to do something and to go and fix the most egregious failures that are in your face, right? That are experienced by businesses and the consumers directly. Electricity, water, transport, logistics, train, things that directly affect the price of things. But I do not have the sense that this broad-based urgency is being replicated elsewhere. Now, some will say it's just a question of time and resources. I do not agree. I do not believe that that's a question of time and resources. A country with a GDP of 5.5, 6 trillion rands has the resources to actually put in place the manpower, the technical skills to go and reform everything that needs to be reformed at once. So I will then connect to one last point, and then I'll pass the baton back to you. But that's why I take what Adi Enthoven in his really good address at, I think it's, what university, sorry?
It's Stellenbosch University.
At Stellenbosch University, what he said, right? We've turned a fundamental corner in reform. I do not agree with that view. I think that a, 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 a series of seeds have been planted, but firstly, I don't think it's enough reforms now that there's a political moment, and I don't think it's ambitious enough. It's better than nothing, but I don't think it's irreversible. And I'll give you an example. Let's assume an illustration. Political fiction. Let's assume, and it's not an implausible scenario, okay? I'm not saying it's likely, but it's entirely possible that at the next ANC leadership conference, the Ramaphosa faction loses, and a more populist, more radical faction wins. And what will happen then is that they will, as we've now seen is twice, they would then recall the president. They would replace that current president, Ramaphosa, by the new president of the ANC, because that's how it's been, and that's what it will be. And then either immediately or after national elections, should they win power again, they might, if it's a radical enough faction, they will reach out to MK and to EFF to put some sort of a new alliance and a radical alliance. And they will, I know exactly what they'll say. They'll say, well, business captured this ANC, and they even paid money to the presidency so that it would reform the economy to advance their interests, and now this is state capture number 2, and we must now have a more profound commitment. We're not out of the wood. We're not out of the wood economically, and that's a separate point we need to discuss. But, I think we're still stuck at about 1.5% per annum under what we're doing, so it's not enough. But what worries me is that South Africa, after 35 years of independence, independence, democratic rule, there's still no economic consensus, and this is really a problem, right? So it's a merry-go-round of factions that take power and then pursue their own vested interest, and they only do the bare minimum to avoid the worst. And it says something that the Ramaphosa presidency essentially did nothing or very little during its first term. And it did nothing or very little during its first term. We ran down from Rapoya to enormous disappointment. And what really, really prompted eventually some traction was the devastating impact of the pandemic, and then the riots, the Zuma riots. I call them the Zuma riots because that's what they are. And then it took the ANC to lose pretty seriously its majority at the poll, to realize that actually the people has spoken and the people wants traction. But it's marginal, right? The political economy of reform is marginal, and it's very, very concentrated in very few hands. And so I think that's also a mistake. And this is where I applaud some of the initiatives of your colleagues, including, the associations of the container users, forum. I think that's what it's called, right? Because this is the kind of business ground level, ground truth democratization you need. So you need businesses to, in a way, act as economic citizens / political citizens, institutional citizens. If we have this massive problem of continued state captures of institutions, and here a little side point, which is my applaud to the New South Institute and to the government for the work they did and they have done on the new public service bill. I think that's essential, but it's only part of the battle. But the lesson for all, and the lesson for your colleagues and for everyone in business and every citizen, is be an activist. And that doesn't mean be a political activist, but be an economic activist, be a logistics activist, be a port and terminal and railroad and freight and licensing and traffic police and rules of the road activist. Do not be a passive witness and victim to the capture, the dysfunction of institutions, infrastructure, parastatals, competition. We have this wonderful competition commission. It is undercapacitated. Be an activist. Do not accept requests for bribery. Do not accept intimidation against implied or explicit bribery. Just say no and report these things and talk to your colleagues about it and put the guys who do this, who do not do their job, press charges against them if needed, write articles about them, write complaints about them. Just be a citizen in all senses of the word. Because otherwise, the risk of capture is just, in my view, too significant until such time as reform and the turnaround of the economy has taken an irreversible path, which it is not there.
Thank you, Claude. I just want to summarize the points that you raised from our point of view. Is that what you, and I'm going to look down because I made some notes while you were talking. I'm sure the colleagues on the line as well, because there's some very good golden nuggets that we can take forward. I think what you were saying is the figures is important, and that was also coming back to what Dr. Jacob always said at the end of our transport, is that we need to look at empirical data. But I think what you want to do is bring the empirical data to the citizens' obligation and be an activist, because we know how supply chains should work. And yes, we as business were not very vocal in the years of state capture because we could see the decline. I mean, many colleagues in the industry were saying to me, we must tell Transnet they must sweat the assets, because that's one of the understanding that we get from corporate. You need to sweat the assets to make sure that they work effectively. But if you don't have assets and it's actually run down, it doesn't matter what you say, you can't do it. So I think that's very important. What you give us is that look at the figures, line the citizen obligation and be an activist. But then I want to hang it on the second pillar to say, when we do those three things, we must always bring it back to growth. Because if we don't have growth, and that's where we want to play in our economic environment, because we don't always understand the political landscape. And I think it's for us as business very problematic if we want to go in there. We want to say we do this because we want to grow. And what means growth in the business sector? And I think you put it so beautifully, is that we need to safeguard this, because it's not anymore now the appointment of the board, the CEOs, the executives. We need to link those together. Now, I want to come to the next concept, and I don't know if you want to have a note on that, and maybe we come to the next
growth
concept.
I do, because as a matter of fact, I was listening to you, and I wanted to bring to your attention the fact that we need to talk about growth, because when I say the reforms are insufficient, what I mean by that is that they are insufficient to get us beyond the kind of 1.5, perhaps, and I don't even think we're going to get there easily, 2%, which is not what we need, and we all know that. I mean, the targets have, keep being revised down and down and down every year. We never reach our forecast, and our forecast is very, very conservative. Why is that? So we are kind of seeing an uptake in growth. We're seeing an uptake in activities at the port. That's a very good indicator. It's immediate, it's operational. It's a sign of something that's happening. But we need to realize that this is just catching up to the years of loss. And it's just the beginning of the turn in the curve. But the truth is that we should be here, right? We are here. And what's changed is that we're no longer doing just this. We're seeing the beginning of this, okay? So this is when I say I disagree with Eddie and Toven and all of those who say we've turned the corner. Yeah, it looks like we have begun to turn a corner. But that is not mission accomplished. That is not success. That is the beginning of the possibility of success. What this does is that it tells us that with a little bit of effort, with a little bit of functioning in some key institutions, with all the rest happening as we discussed earlier, this country can grow. Now, that is what it tells us. What it should allow us to do is that with that little regain of hope and optimism, what we shouldn't do is say, okay, mission accomplished, we're good, we can go back to the business of minding our own businesses. That's not at all what that says to us. What that says to us is, hang on. Now the true hard work begins of actually ensuring that that inflection point represents turning a corner.
Or maybe the inflection point equals activist.
That's exactly that. That's exactly
because that's probably what you want to phrase. That,
activist.
yeah, we must take the inflection point and equal it to activist, and then we'll make sure we've got sustainability in our reform.
Well, exactly, and that's why I like this conversation so much, because I think when I hear your colleagues on the ground who are proving themselves to be business activists, they are catching this turn, right? They are catching the opportunity of this signal, this political signal to specific reforms, and the payoff that it's showing, right? People aren't beaten down, right? The point of this conversation is not to beat people down. On the contrary, is to say, okay, right, now this is the time to go. This is a time when it's a signal to oneself, right? We're turning this corner, let's go. Let's just make sure it inflected further. It's also a signal to the institutions, to the state, to the partners, to the port players. We are here, we are with you, but we are also watching you. And we are not going to tolerate what happened in the past. We have learned from state capture. We know how it looks like, we know how it's triggered, we know how it manifests, we know how it impacts us, and we are not going to let it happen. A citizen's economy.
Yes, I think it's actually, for me, while you're talking, such a beautiful picture over the weekend when we played against France. It was very much, yes, when we get a red card, it was an inflection point. But what they so beautifully did, they stay on the plan, they took the inflection card of the red card, and they were then, the love for the country, in my simple understanding, drove them to play their hearts out. And that's what you're actually calling to us. We must make sure that we're active citizens, and we use this inflection point to make sure that everyone see how we love our country and that we want to grow. But Claude, I want to come in. One of the things that people were asking, quantify for us the 10 times more of a crisis and the cost of a crisis. So I don't know if you have empirical data, but maybe there's something that you just quickly want to address this question. Then we'll come to the last question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there is empirical data on that. I don't have it offhand, but it's basic economics and finance, right? Let's just take a simple example. We all know what it takes to fix a street, a road that has been allowed to go down because it hasn't been maintained. So what is maintenance? It's simply the capital required to keep it steady state. What is capital investment? It's the capital required to get it into a functioning state. What is this crisis? What is crisis? In this particular case, it's the product of having diverted funds that were intended for maintenance and operational performance away from that. So and we've seen with the cost of ESCOM, right? So what do you have when you steal that money, right? And no matter how you steal it, whether it goes to partners or it's lost or it's stolen, it's not allocating, it's not doing what it's allocated for by people who were supposed to do it. When you steal that money, okay, the asset starts to depreciate at an accelerating rate. And I'm not talking about financial depreciation. I'm talking about operational, functional depreciation. It is less and less able to do what it is supposed to do compared to the baseline. So this is the baseline, and this is what's happening. And this thing initially is barely perceptible because it's still in a very good state. But the less you invest, the less you maintain it, the faster you have your curve. That becomes then exponential. The longer you wait, and we waited 15 years, the longer you wait, and in some cases 20 years for the ESCOM fleet, the longer you wait, the more depleted that capital is. And so you have the direct, so you have firstly, you have the money that was supposed to go, that's gone. That's gone, okay? Then you have the economic activity that was supposed to be allowed by this process. Less electricity produced, more breakdown. So that's economic activity foregone, jobs foregone, GDP foregone, tax foregone, etc. Social well-being foregone. Then there is the cost of money, the new money you have to put in to fix what was broken. Now, it's, as I said, and we all know that, what is cheaper? To clean up and change the bags in a vacuum cleaner, or to keep using that vacuum cleaner with the old bag, not clean it, not maintain it until it blows up? And then you have to buy a brand new vacuum cleaner. Okay, so what is a vacuum cleaner? I don't know, 2,000 Rand. What are bags of vacuum cleaners? I don't know, 50 Rands. So the rule of thumb is that it costs directly, monetary-wise, it costs 10 times, usually 10 times about. The cost of crisis is 10 times the cost of maintenance. But it's actually a lot more because that's the direct monetary fiduciary cost. That's what you have to put out of your pocket. But it does not account for the economic opportunity cost of what happens. So if we were to calculate, and there's been some attempts, but if we were to assume, for instance, that instead of growing at an average of 0.8% over the past 10 years, South Africa had grown at 3%. How much bigger would be the economy? Well, it would be 25, 30, 40% bigger than what it is. Possibly more. GDP per capita would be significantly higher. Inequality would be much lower. Unemployment would be higher. And what concerns me in the conversation about reform right now and all the celebratory thing is we are not having that conversation about what we do to stop the next crisis and what do we do to get now to a point where those reforms are irreversible.
Yeah, I think one of the comments was also was that UNITA, we're just talking, talk. But I think that comes back to your 2 points. What do we make sure that reforms are irreversible? And probably the other thing that you have said earlier, how can we accelerate it? Because we need to do more, because we need the 3% growth. So maybe just quickly on those two things, how do we make sure it is irreversible? Is it because we are citizen activists, or what will do that?
Well, that's one aspect. We have to work at all levels, right? Tactical, and be citizen activists at tactical, and invest and work and hold them accountable. We have to be involved in the planning and the investing and the key decisions at the operational. And then obviously we have to put tremendous pressure and partake at the strategic level, which is a political presidency level, B4SA, BUSA, all of that. It needs to be a broader conversation. There needs to be more people at the table. For two reasons. Firstly, nobody has absolute knowledge and science. And secondly, my concern is that, and I said that earlier, is if it's too narrow a group of people who are doing these things, it creates the political breeding ground for the argument that this government is captured by big business. And it will feed into this kind of counter-populism, right? This is not your government, it's a government of big white monopoly capitalism and all that stuff that will be said. And that's not in 5 years' time, or that's next year, the year after, the next year's municipal elections, the year after the internal ANC election. You know, this country never stops campaigning. So we need to be there in those conversations and influencing. It can't be a closed little club. The thing that then another action is, and I think what makes those reforms irreversible, as long as we have these immense, enormous parastatals who can be captured by the next president like that, and can on one phone call undo everything, we are in danger zone. These need to be commercialized and privatized in a way that cannot be reversed. And just like for the telecom, the cell phone system, telecom didn't fall for capture because it already had been commercialized and privatized. It remained highly functioning, right? This is what we need. So,
but maybe Claude, I just want to ask you I think it's probably differently because, you know, in the logistics network, it's a design structure, and the design structure was like that. We didn't do intra-port competition, inter-port competition, and I think that's probably what you were saying now. With this structure and with the lack of citizen activism, the system was actually eating us up because we design a structure, and that also allow now for not vertical separation and not inter and intra-port competition, and that's now what we're sitting with. But correct. I want to stop here and just ask you, because you said we must make sure that the reform ensure that it's irreversible and that it helps us. But I always want to close off with a good thought, and maybe the colleagues that's listening to us can take it further. What would you say if I wake you up at 3 o'clock at night and say, Claude, what is the one thing we need to do? What would that be? Is it just citizen activism, or what would you say? Just one item.
My word, you know, I that's a question I hate, you know, as if there was a magic bullet.
I know.
There's no magic bullet. We have to do everything all the time. And if you wake me up at 3 in the morning and I'm in a terrible mood, good luck with you. Like, so in regard to the logistics system specifically.
Yeah, what would you?
Yeah,
because remember that the design was like we had the design of the port systems, the TNPA, TPT.
Well, that's what I would change. That's what I would change.
Yeah, the vertical separation. Yes,
I would change that. You know, I would break down Transnet, and I would allocate, and I would get the ports to compete, and I would have them privately operated, and I would do that. I would just break it down, not because I'm an advocate of privatization and, you know, because I'm anti-state. I'm not. On the contrary, I'm for a very performing state. But when you don't have the human capacity, the capital capacity, when you have a history of state and institutional capture, you protect yourself not against some ideological dirty capitalist privatization mumbo jumbo. You fight against the enemy that is real, which is capture and non-performing assets. Otherwise, what concerns me is, and that's the Eskom trouble now. We cannot save Eskom at the cost of the economy with year-on-year 16-20% increase in tariffs. That's a Faustian deal, right? What is the point of, what is the point of saving Eskom if we have unaffordable electricity for the people and the economy? What if we save Eskom and, oh, great, they're producing electricity. Oh, it's just twice the price, that average competitors, and it's 10 times the price it used to be. We don't have the luxury of indulging the notion that we should have functioning parastatals. No. That's a goals displacement. What we need to have is competitive, cost-effective, functioning, affordable primary goods so that our economy can function. Fixing them was vital because they have monopoly. Breaking them down is the first step. Fixing them, that's not reform, that's stabilization and crisis management. Reform is getting rid of them, replacing them with competitive entities who are under the gun of competition rules to ensure that they truly compete against one another and that non-competitive behavior are punished.
Thank you, Claude.
And South Africans, South Africans have the appetite, they have the capacity, they have the indestructible, I go back to your rugby analogy, they have this indestructible strengths of character and entrepreneurialism and ability to get back on their feet and do it. If only this government, if only the next government, if only the ANC and trusted South Africans and gave them the space to do what they do best, which is to work, they will fix it.
Lord, with that beautiful note, to give the chance for the citizens to work, it's actually remarkable because you're quite right. Every one of us is hardworking and we just want a safe, secure and a compliant trading environment. And we want to make sure that we can leave a legacy for our children, for everyone. And it was so beautiful when Mandela had the dream, a rainbow nation. And that's something that's living in our hearts. Yes, we probably play this rugby game for the next 35 years, but we believe, and I want to leave the colleagues with that, and I think you put it so nicely, we probably must clone a term to make sure we supply chain activism to keep our logistics network intact and to make sure that it can foster and cultivate growth. But with that, Claude, thank you very much. Much appreciated. And we will keep on talking. As you said, we need to have constructive dialogue to share the different thoughts and make sure that we craft the best way forward. With that, thank you, colleagues, and we say goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
This podcast is hosted by SAAFF to explore questions from our webinar on logistics reform. The views expressed by our guest, Claude JPD Baisak, are his own and do not reflect SAAFF's positions. SAAFF is apolitical, focused on promoting private sector participation, a free market, and an efficient logistics network to grow the national economy sustainably.